Well, hi everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here to listen to our thoughts because I think we have a lot to talk about. It's a very, very extensive topic that we have at our hand. The CEO's Guide to Leading by Example, Productivity Starts at Top. But before we get into the details of what drives productivity, the first question is, what is productivity to you? Is it those 90-hour work week that people expect you to be in office for, or what defines productivity for you? Duraj, why don't you start with it?
Yeah, thank you, Anisha, and thank you for inviting me on this panel. I think it's a very interesting question and one that deserves deeper thought. When you look at productivity, I think it's important not to look at input-driven measures such as did you work 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours, but more at the output-driven measures in terms of what aspect of your goals you've achieved. And I think the whole idea of having a CEO or a leader of a team is try and drive the team together to try and achieve a certain level of productivity or achieve the preset goals that everyone has bought into. And I think that is probably the best way to look at it.
Any additional thoughts, Arendra, Sadat?
Yeah, I think typically what is the measurable productivity in today's world is the monetary value that people ascribe in terms of a measurable one. But if you're a housewife, you can't measure that. If you're a child, you can't measure that. But in terms of a company, individual, or an economy, there is a measure to that. All right. So I think output is the right measure. Input can be variable, but as we progress, I think the output value has to keep increasing with the finite inputs that we're putting in.
But that brings me to the other question, Sarah, which Neela was also pointing out. There are people in your team which are very high productivity guys, but they are not the guys that you might wanna like depend on. They are not the most loyal, or they are the so-called toxic people of sorts. To that extent, how do you differentiate or how do you decide whether you wanna kind of level up with a person who's high productivity, or you would rather be with a person who is more loyal, who's more dependable, who keeps the culture of the team in a very, very healthy way?
I think the loyalty is a two-way street and not at the cost of productivity for sure. So productivity definitely in today's very high-paced and highly competitive world cannot be compromised just for loyalty. Loyalty is a two-way street, definitely. That's important, but at the same time, not at the cost of productivity.
I think that's a bit contentious. Would you guys agree that productivity is something which is more important than loyalty? Because it's a different school of thought, because culturally all those old kind of legacy businesses that we have seen tend to always focus on loyalty more. What's your take?
Yeah, if I may just add to that, I think in today's hyper-competitive world, it's really important you need to be out there being productive. Otherwise, you get left behind. Okay. But what I've learned is that over time, as people rise in the organization, what you need, there are a lot of very smart people, a lot of very capable people, a lot of very well-qualified, well-educated people. And that IQ quotient is very high. But I think as you rise today, it's more and more important that that IQ is matched with an EQ, with an empathy, with some element of concern about the other people. So I'm not sure whether it's a productivity versus loyalty debate, but I would like to put it that if you really want to be successful at what you do, in addition to the IQ, which everybody has, I think most people, when you're looking at a corporate environment, people are well qualified, etc., etc. But developing that EQ over time and the ability to work with people is, I think, a defining feature in terms of how far you will go.
I think that's very well put, because I think EQ and empathy is something which all the leaders need to have in order to kind of bring that to the fore as well. But since we're talking about productivity, let me take a step back and ask you, what is productivity for you in the sense? What drives your productivity? Because it's something which is very different for different people. There are people who have high, high amount of spurts of high productivity, and then for 2 hours they'll be doing nothing and being in the coffee break area, and then just probably playing a game with their friends, etc. How do you drive productivity, Harendra?
Yeah, so I think I'll just take a little longer here, just to put it in context. Number one is we have a math. So for us at the top, we are judged by the turnovers, with the profits, with the scale that we achieve. Now, what's the formula for that? I think productivity is first is you deliver on the I. I is the individual. The capacity of the individual needs to be expanded. I think with every individual in your firm, if it comes in with an X potential, you need to multiply it, right? So that's number one. Number two is the ecosystem, right? I think eh, the same engineer in India earns X, but you transport him to the US, his output is multiplied. The same farmer in the village, when he goes to the urban area, his output multiplies, right? So I think the ecosystem per se has to be such that it delivers and adds more value to his inherent value, right? And then you multiply it with this time. You give enough time, slowly your outcomes will diverge from mediocre people. So these three elements are very, very important. And coming back to your earlier question on high performers versus loyalty, I think if you have a system which is driving monopolies, that means by in itself the firm value is toxic. But if it's efficient as a firm, no monopolies will get developed, and you'll have a democratic set of outperformers within your company. That itself will remove the toxicity down.
Yeah, democratic, having equal opportunity to everyone is something that really definitely works. But Sarah, if I can ask you, he talked about creating that ecosystem. How, let's say, just being in US, the productivity is much higher, or being in a different city versus a smaller town. How do you create that ecosystem? Because it's easier said than done.
Yes, it's easier said than done. I completely agree, and I endorse what Harinder said just now. Uh, Ecosystem is one of the big levers, which will set the productivity on the right path, or can actually take it down. But how do you set up ecosystem is again like you have to recognize the need of every company would have some core basic needs and would have some kind of indirect, I would say indirect for every role, indirect levers which needs to be built. It is not about having a nice coffee in machine or a great cafeteria to give a wow feeling. But I think beyond that, there would be a lot of other stuff which drives productivity need to be built, and hence it is very case subjective. I come from a manufacturing background and not as expert as my co-panelist in the world of finance, which is numbers driven. Here, like if I have to put a case of say manufacturing shop floor, it is completely different than what we would build in a corporate office here. So it goes from you have like small engagement activities, which is like even for a gardening, you have got plantations, you have got yeah, you have harvesting seasons, all of that engagement activity which actually keeps people in high spirit for delivering those productivity level uh, as, uh, what you desire them to do. Apart from that, facilitating those things inside the shop floor as well. There are many small, it's a world of automations and tech. So obviously you need to actually provide them those uh, facilities inside the shop floor as well. So we manufacture building material, which is heavy cargo to deliver. And I can just relate it 30 years back. We had to pick it hand manually. Then came the manual push machines, and then there are today it is all auto robo which actually picks up. But people role has changed. Obviously, a 30 years back, a worker on the shop floor was having a different need, and today it is completely different. And organization need to transit those journey and keep evolving. I think it's a very different and very case subjective to each of the companies, and which is hybrid or completely core manufacturing or completely very software or all those kind of things. So there, I think the ecosystem development is completely different, but people becomes the center of it, what you actually built around it. And I completely agree, ecosystem is a very, very big driver to productivity.
Yeah, ecosystem is the big enabler for productivity. And you said that, yes, it's very subjective to different organizations indeed. But one thread which is common and which is perhaps something that brings down productivity is uncertainty, which brings down morale is something that you don't know. When your leaders don't perhaps answer the questions or take things head on. So, Darius, my question to you is, what do you do in such situations? Let's say when COVID hit, or when right now we are in the AI age, there is that entire concern or worry around it as to what will happen to the jobs, and maybe not financial jobs to that extent, but what role will technology play, because we're talking about trust, technology and talent right now, and technology is a major part of talent as well. How do you make sure that your communication is very transparent and you address these concerns head on?
Yeah, absolutely, Anisha. The reality, Anisha, is that we live in a world of uncertainty, right? I don't know if I'll be there tomorrow. So, and you have to learn how to sort of mobilize yourself in this space. And hence, coming back to the earlier question that both my co-panelists spoke about ecosystem, and part of the ecosystem of handling uncertainty. What is an ecosystem? It's all about creating the culture and a culture to handle this uncertainty. And an ecosystem can be within just a few of us. It can be an entire corporation. It can be in a whole area. And when I think about this, one of the first examples that actually comes to my mind, I've been for the last 30 years in the private equity and venture capital space, primarily in India. And when you think about venture capital and when you think about investing in innovation, there is one ecosystem that has been unparalleled in this world, and that is the Silicon Valley. I mean, anytime you think of Google, you think of Netflix, you think of any of the big tech names, and they were all somehow born in Silicon Valley. And the reason that Silicon Valley, if you think about what has created that ecosystem that has led to so much recurring success, it's not like that one success, not two, recurring success over time, in good periods, in bad periods, young companies, old companies, etc. And I think one of the things that comes out that differentiates Silicon Valley from, I think, anywhere else is that there is absolutely no stigma, zero stigma associated with failure. If you set up a company and you fail, in a lot of parts of the world, oh no, don't touch this guy, he's not worked. But there it's seen as a learning experience. It's seen as adding to your experience. And there's enough and more examples about people who failed once, failed twice, failed three, and then became successful later. And I think that is really a large part about creating a culture of success in an ecosystem which leads to productivity, which enables you to handle the uncertainties of life. And I think for me, that has always been a sort of real shining example.
Yeah, but that brings me to the next question. Perhaps you can answer and Harendra can also take it. Would you be willing to hire a person like that yourself? Because as you said, there is a stigma in this country with respect to failures. If you have somebody who, let's say, quit a job in 6 months or is sitting without a job right now, has a great career to talk about, but is right now unemployed, or is somebody who was an ex-startup founder, right now has a gap in his CV, usually, and I'm not pointing out anyone here, but usually either those AIs or the tools or the HRs just skim that out in terms of the CVs that you are talking to as potential candidates. Would you be willing to hire that person? Do you think that is changing and that needs a rethink?
No, very good question. And I think a very relevant and practical question that we all face today. And I think you correctly said it's changing. The way we would look at it 10 years ago is very different from the way we look at it today. And I think today, when you talk to someone who has experienced a failure, I mean, we're all humans, right? We've all experienced failures. It's important to, again, coming back to the older topic of empathy, understanding the reason for the failure. And some failures can be driven by circumstances really beyond your control. And if you believe that's the case, but the person has intrinsic merit, then why not give him a chance? And, sometimes it's these guys who've experienced failure due to no faults of them, who are actually more motivated to show that that was not really, their calling. They could have actually succeeded in a different environment, and hence they are more motivated to move ahead. So I think it's a case-by-case situation. You have to delve deeper to understand the root cause of that failure earlier.
But at least give them a chance, guys. Don't just weed out the resumes just thinking that there is a bit of a gap. Harendra, I just wanted to come back to the point that we were talking about, transparency. And right now, because we're talking about tech talent and trust, there is that mistrust or lack of understanding what role, let's say, AI is going to play. And of course, it's not going to only have impact on select businesses, it's going to impact lives throughout, whether it's an editor, whether it's whatever, and whether even in terms of the financial metrics, what work perhaps a lot of, the AI-driven tools can give you directly in terms of Excel and number crunching and all of that. How are you looking at inculcating that technology without making it a bit of a sore point for your employees?
Okay, so many of the technologies are not going to like it, but AI is no threat to mankind, right? AI is developed by man to help man. So number one, I think people should get on terms with that. Man has always been innovating to add tools to help him work better, efficiently, but he cannot replace man. Man is the topmost machine in this universe, number one. Number two is the cost of capital and what it produces uh, should always be lower than what a man can produce. Then there will be no unemployment. Right? Fundamentally, I think, so if you have to raise productivity of man, right, if he can drive more output and more value higher, machine is never a threat, right? So I think that is the fundamental premise when we are looking at organizations and people, is to say what every individual in your firm, what output he can drive, right? So that's, once this balance is restored, there is no threat to employment or nations or countries. Second is how do you use these tools to weed out inefficiencies, low value add work. So I think fundamentally, if you use machines to weed out low value add work in time, etc., that will drive efficiency within your companies. We've seen, email will come, paper will go out, internet, paper is thriving, so are paper stocks, right? So I think they will exist the way they are, right? But I think organizations should learn how to use technology and remove inefficiencies, not as a primary tool of operations.
Fair, but how do you ensure upskilling in that? Because it's about rethinking, and we are rethinking these roles and people's jobs as well. How do you ensure that there is no inertia in people to accept those technologies and they're able to upskill themselves?
Yeah, so this is the key statement that's out in the market is AI is not a threat to employment, but to people who don't know AI, how to operate AI, right? So of course, I think this message has to go to everybody. Like we are seeing, say in investment banking, there is a short supply of lawyers or people who process transaction. People are innovating how documents can be read through faster. Young students are writing statement of purpose from the chat GPT. So there are various ways of using this to improve efficiency. So once you communicate and the message goes through that is going to help your life, I think the adoption is at a far higher level. They have to see the change and benefit for themselves. It's not so difficult.
Okay, let me put you on the spot there. Have you managed to upskill yourself and learn and use ChatGPT in your everyday stuff?
Absolutely. So what we are doing is we are looking our morning note, which was manually done, now is generated by a chat GPT. So we just input all our research there. It comes, generates. So our sales notes go out. We're looking at how to automate research. We are looking at how to sell our research through digital platforms. So the same message in a different way, but the message is original. Let me reiterate, the message is original.
Yeah, the content and ideation, that still is something which humans do. It's only the delivery which is done in an automatic way. Sir, let me come to you a point which I think you'll address the best, because you, of course, have a bit of a manufacturing shop floor kind of background. Neela was just talking about how there's an importance of having an agile mindset, how you need to have a startup culture. Now, in a company which, let's say, has a huge workforce, who has a very process-oriented, culture in place, how do you ensure that you're agile enough as well, that you're able to move at a faster pace basis the requirement of the people?
So I think with this question, so you actually have put me in spot. So it is in a manufacturing setup, agility has got different definitions for sure. And here, I think we have a lot of, I think my audience here, which is very knowledgeable with respect to the compliances, the kind of codes, ethics, measurements, what it goes through for managing those. It's not that a shop floor management has got it. Like you can't have 8 hours plus, you cannot employ somebody beyond 244 days. So all of that, when you look at, it is like you tend to get inspired to adopt And these are indirect inefficiency in the system, which is you address through a lot of tech solutions. And which is like, just to quote an example, suppose a kiln operating at a various temperature level for a 200-300 meter, and it is being controlled manually by a few operators. And over the period, you feed the intelligence to a machine, and it operates wonderfully better. And then probably a lot of plants have done away with manual operations and then improve efficiency, because you don't need to get within the boundary of say 8-hour shift for those kind of. It is very it is essential, but it is not like very high emergency critical role. And such kind of things in many of the shop floor industries have been adopted in last 10 to 12 years, and that has shown results. In manufacturing, I think it is very difficult to navigate the agility, but I think the more of discussions with respect to what can actually make it more faster, how can the productivity can go up by taking help of any of the technology solutions, is, I think, the way forward, and is being practiced by various manufacturing forums, and that is, I think, the good savior to make it agile. So I think I would leave it at that, because this is little difficult to transit agility in this way. It's not about you are changing a CPU of X processing power to Y, and you have got a plug-in there. You have a lot of guardrails which you have to navigate.
Yeah, and sure, you
while
need to
building.
have the empathy for the human capital as well. You can't suddenly have a big shift. It has to be in a very transition way. But the good news is that at least those conversations are happening. Why do we need that punching in, punching out? If you're talking about productivity which is not managed by us, I think that is where there is a bit of a disconnect and a bit of a rethinking perhaps which is needed.
Yeah, so I think this is a discussion which is not apt for India. Fundamentally, we are an underdeveloped economy. For any economy to become developed, be it China, be it Japan, be it US, it took 40 to 50 years of more than 20 hours of work to become a developed economy. And this is not what we're doing for ourselves. We're doing for the country, for our children. I remember my brothers, when they graduated, they had no jobs. Then the liberalization came. Today we walk in malls, right? If we want our children to be in a grown-up, a great country, I think this generation has to work hard. Now, what is hard is debatable, right? I think it is. I think it's a wrong discussion at the wrong point or wrong juncture of the economy. So I think every one of us have to think 5x, 6x of the outcomes that we are currently doing if the next generation of India has to do well. So, be it the great conversation on work from home and office, how do children learn? Why do we send children to school? They could have learned the same thing in house. They did not. They learned through peers, through elders, through grown-ups. It's a peer ecosystem that develops. You learn from your elder brother. Like people who have joined new offices and who don't, take new jobs but they work from home, they're not learning from the behavior of elders and the organizational learning that has. So I think at this point of time, the key thing for every professional is how does he generate 2x, 3x output in his professional career, be successful, be useful in any way. I think the point that most CEOs were trying to make was not on the number of hours, is the commitment to the outcomes and to the growth of the firm. I think that's what they were meaning.
And I tend to completely agree with Harinder. And one more point which we are lucky that we have, while we are transiting this journey in the country, we are lucky to have a great tech support which has come in due course, and it is unveiling a lot of help, which is was not true in 1980s when China started working hard, or in 70s and 80s when Japan started working hard, or maybe in 60s and prior to that, even US industrializations when it actually picked up. So I think tech is also a very big support system which has developed around all of this. It is actually helping taking out all of those inefficiencies, which is, even if we are talking about few hours of productivity, can go up substantially high by deploying all of the tech solutions which are there.
Interesting.
If I can just add, I agree with both my colleagues were saying, and I'd just like to add that from an HR person's perspective, when you're trying to inculcate a certain behavioral pattern in the people, again, I think this 40, 80 hours, whatever, is not the right discussion, but it's trying to build the right culture and having the clear communication. I think once you have the clear communication of what is expected, then I think it makes things a lot easier. And also, again, in this debate, I agree with my colleague, this, work from home versus work in the office. I think the big advantage of coming to work is your peer learning. Even when you're not at your desk, but you're in the canteen or at the coffee shop, you're talking to others, you're exchanging ideas, you're learning from others, and I think that cannot be, taken lightly.